When we left off in part 1, Britain had just made a fatal mistake. They had defeated France in the 7 Years' War, but victory came with a nasty bill. And instead of paying it themselves, they decided the colonies would pick up the tab. One tax after another, on stamps, on sugar, on paint, on paper. And when the colonists pushed back, when protests turned into boycotts and boycotts turned into riots, London's answer wasn't compromise. It was force. The Boston Massacre in 1770 should have been a warning shot. 5 colonists gunned down in the snow by jittery redcoats. But instead of cooling things down, Britain doubled down. They repealed most of the Townshend taxes, sure, but they kept one stubborn duty alive: tea. Now, you might think, seriously? Tea? All this rage, all this bloodshed over a few pennies on a drink? But that's where perspective matters. Tea in the 18th century wasn't just a hot beverage. It was culture. It was ritual. It was how families gathered, how friends bonded, how merchants sealed deals. And more than that, it was a symbol. Every cup poured in the colonies was a reminder of empire, a reminder of Britain itself. So when Parliament insisted on keeping the tax on tea, the message was crystal clear. We can still tax you. We still own you. But here's where things got complicated. The British East India Company, one of the most powerful corporations in the world, was drowning in unsold tea. Parliament stepped in with the Tea Act of 1773, allowing the company to ship tea directly to America, cutting out colonial middlemen. With the tax still attached, it was cheaper than smuggled Dutch tea. To London, this was genius. Colonists get cheap tea, the company unloads its stock, and Britain proves it can tax whenever it wants. But to colonists, this stank like a trap. Cheap tea wasn't a gift. It was bait. Take it, and you admit Parliament's right to tax you. And once you give an inch, you know they'll take a mile. Boston wasn't about to play along. On December 16, 1773, a bitterly cold night, a group of colonists disguised as Mohawk Indians crept onto British ships. With axes in hand and crowds cheering from the docks, they smashed open crates and heaved 342 chests of tea into the icy harbor. The water foamed dark, like a massive boiling teapot. And here's the kicker: they cleaned up after themselves. They didn't steal, they didn't pocket anything. This wasn't about loot, it was about principle. Imagine standing there, your breath visible in the night air, tossing box after box into the sea, knowing full well you were committing treason against the most powerful empire on earth. That wasn't vandalism. That was revolution, and London saw it the same way. To Britain, the Boston Tea Party wasn't protest. It was rebellion. And in 1774, Parliament hit back with the Coercive Acts, or as the colonists renamed them, the Intolerable Acts. Boston's port was slammed shut until the tea was paid for. Massachusetts' government was gutted, local officials now appointed by the Crown. Town meetings? Restricted. Soldiers could be quartered in private homes. And worst of all, royal officials accused of crimes in the colonies would be shipped back to Britain for trial. Imagine a soldier kicked in your door, ate your food, and slept in your bed. And if you dared complain, he'd be tried in London, where his buddies ran the court. These weren't just laws. They were chains. But here's the irony. Instead of crushing rebellion, the Intolerable Acts lit a fire. Colonists across America saw what Britain was capable of. If they could strangle Boston, they could strangle anyone. And so, wagons of grain and barrels of flour rolled in from as far away as South Carolina. A Boston problem became an American problem. This is where unity began to bloom. In September 1774, delegates from 12 colonies, all except Georgia, gathered in Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress. Picture it: men from New England, the South and the Middle colonies, farmers, lawyers, planters, merchants, all with different accents, interests, and economies, sitting shoulder to shoulder in the same hall. They weren't a nation. Some weren't even sure they wanted independence. But they agreed on one thing: Britain had gone too far. The Congress declared the Intolerable Acts null and void. They organized a colony-wide boycott of British goods. They urged every colony to form militias, ordinary men trained and ready at a minute's notice. And most importantly, they agreed to meet again if things didn't change. It wasn't independence yet, but it was a declaration of resolve. Still, America wasn't united. Not everyone cheered the Congress. Loyalists, those who stayed faithful to Britain, thought this was madness. Britain was still their protector, their trading partner, their shield against France and Spain. They warned that rebellion meant chaos, ruined trade, and maybe even invasion. And let's be real, Britain still had the most powerful army and navy on the planet. Standing against it wasn't just reckless, and it was suicidal. So by 1774, America was split three ways. Patriots pushing for resistance, Loyalists clinging to stability, and a huge middle ground just hoping things could somehow go back to normal. But history doesn't wait for moderates. In early 1775, General Thomas Gage, Britain's commander in Boston, got orders to move. Seize the colonists' gunpowder. Arrest rebel leaders like Samuel Adams and John Hancock. Restore order before this spark became a fire. On the night of April 18, 1775, as redcoats marched quietly out of Boston, colonial riders thundered into the countryside. Paul Revere, William Dawes, Samuel Prescott, names now immortal, spread the alarm. The British are coming! Bells rang, dogs barked, farmhouses lit up as men grabbed muskets and powder. At dawn, April 19th, on the village green of Lexington, 70 militiamen stood nervously in the mist. Farmers, blacksmiths, shopkeepers, facing down hundreds of redcoats. Imagine the silence, the drumbeat of British feet, the pounding of your own heart. Then, a single gunshot. No one knows who fired first. But history would call it the shot heard round the world, the British unleashed volleys. Smoke filled the green. 8 colonists fell dead. The militia scattered. But the fight wasn't over. By the time the redcoats pushed into Concord, the countryside had risen. Farmers dropped their plows. Apprentices abandoned workshops. Old men grabbed muskets that hadn't fired in decades. At the North Bridge, they stood their ground. Shots rang out. This time the British fell back, and that retreat turned into chaos. The march back to Boston became a nightmare gauntlet. Minutemen swarmed from every village, firing from behind stone walls, from barns, from forests. It wasn't a battle. It was a running ambush, mile after mile. Every step cost blood. By the time the redcoats staggered back into Boston, they had lost more than 250 men. The colonists? About 90, but the message was louder than cannon fire. This wasn't a riot. This wasn't a scuffle. This was war, think about it. Ordinary men, farmers, blacksmiths, teenagers barely old enough to shave, had stood against the world's most disciplined army and survived. They didn't win because they had better weapons or sharper uniforms. They won because they had conviction. Because they believed this wasn't about taxes or trade anymore. It was about dignity, about their homes, about the future of their children. In that moment, something irreversible happened. Colonists stopped asking if conflict was coming. They knew it was already here. Once blood was spilled, once neighbors were buried, the question wasn't if they would resist, but how far they were willing to go. So let me ask you, if you had stood on Lexington Green that morning, musket in hand, heart pounding as the redcoats advanced, would you fire? Would you hold your ground knowing one trigger pull could change history forever? Or would you step aside, hoping to live another day, letting someone else take that risk? Drop your answer in the comments, because revolutions aren't made by kings and generals. They're made by ordinary people making impossible choices. And if you're still here with me, smash that like button, subscribe for part 3, and tell me, would you have been a patriot risking it all, or a loyalist betting on stability? No judgment, history's complicated, and your perspective matters.